In 2008, Casey Anthony's young daughter Caylee vanished without a trace. A month later, Casey's strange behavior led to her arrest, and soon after, Caylee's remains were found near the family home. The high-stakes trial that followed left the nation stunned with a verdict that still sparks outrage and questions about justice today. If you're into unraveling true crime cases like this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries that still haunt us. The story of Casey Anthony and her family begins in a quiet Orlando, Florida suburb, where the Anthony family lived an otherwise typical life. Casey Anthony, born in 1986, was the daughter of Cindy and George Anthony, a middle-class couple who seemed devoted to their family. Cindy worked as a nurse while George, a former police officer, worked in security. Together they raised Casey and her older brother Lee in a close-knit family that valued stability and togetherness. But this seemingly ordinary family life changed dramatically when Casey, in her early 20s, became pregnant with her daughter Caylee. The identity of Caylee's father was never publicly confirmed, adding an element of mystery from the beginning. When Caylee was born in August 2005, Cindy and George welcomed her with open arms. They took on a supportive role, even helping to raise Caylee as they took on the responsibilities that Casey sometimes struggled to manage. Cindy especially grew deeply attached to her granddaughter, seeing her almost as an extension of herself. She was a doting grandmother who would do anything for Caylee, often treating her as her own child. Casey, in many ways, took on the primary role of Caylee's caregiver, but her approach to motherhood was complex. In the Anthony household, she lived under the same roof as her parents, which gave them a front-row view of her relationship with Caylee. While Casey presented herself as a loving mother in public, her actions didn't always align with that image. At times, Casey struggled with the responsibilities of motherhood. She had Caylee at a young age and by many accounts wanted to live a life that was more typical of a young single woman, one that wasn't defined by the demands of parenting. This tension led to frequent clashes with Cindy. Cindy, fiercely protective and deeply involved, often questioned Casey's choices and priorities, particularly when it came to Caylee's care. Family arguments reportedly grew more intense over the years, with Cindy and Casey's relationship becoming strained. Cindy would challenge Casey's decisions, sometimes accusing her of being irresponsible or selfish, while Casey, feeling constrained, would resist her mother's influence. These tensions simmered in the background, creating a complex dynamic in the household. George's role was more subdued compared to Cindy's, but he wasn't uninvolved. Though he supported Cindy in her concerns, he often took on the role of mediator, attempting to maintain peace in the family. However, he too had his struggles. At one point, George faced financial and career challenges, including filing for bankruptcy, which added additional strain on the family. Yet despite his own difficulties, he cared deeply for Caylee, often stepping in to help raise her alongside Cindy. The family dynamic became even more complicated as Casey's behavior raised suspicions. While she projected an image of a responsible mother, Casey led a double life, often going out with friends, socializing, and posting photos online that portrayed a carefree lifestyle, one that seemed inconsistent with the realities of raising a young child. Casey had a tendency to evade questions, offering vague or contradictory answers to her family when they pressed her about her life and choices. This pattern of behavior created a sense of distrust, especially from Cindy, who began to question whether Casey was truly the committed mother she claimed to be. Despite these underlying issues, the Anthony family maintained a semblance of unity for Caylee's sake. They shared a home, and Casey had a reliable support system to help her manage the demands of parenthood. Cindy and George took pride in being present for Caylee, who quickly became the centerpiece of their lives. To the outside world, they were an involved and loving family determined to give Caylee a stable environment. In June 2008, the Anthony family's world took a dark and unexpected turn. The last known sighting of Caylee Anthony was on June 16, 2008, when she was seen leaving her grandparents' house with her mother, Casey. That day, Cindy and George Anthony, Casey's parents, thought everything seemed normal. Cindy went to work, assuming Caylee was safe and would be with her mother as usual. Yet after that day, there was no more contact with Caylee. Weeks passed without a clear explanation from Casey about Caylee's whereabouts. The family's concerns grew, but Casey consistently evaded questions or gave vague answers, saying Caylee was fine and staying with friends or a nanny. By mid-July, Cindy's concern turned to alarm. A month had gone by since she'd last seen her granddaughter, and Casey's explanations about Caylee's absence continued to seem increasingly suspicious. On July 15, 2008, after a month of Casey's evasive behavior, Cindy decided to take action. She tracked down Casey, who had been staying with friends, and demanded answers. In a heated confrontation, Cindy repeatedly questioned Casey about Caylee, but her responses only raised more doubts. When pressed, Casey finally claimed that Caylee had been taken by a babysitter named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, whom she said had been watching Caylee regularly. That evening, Cindy made a series of urgent 911 calls to report Caylee missing. In her first call, Cindy explained that she hadn't seen her granddaughter in a month and was fearful about her safety. But with each call, her distress escalated. In her final call, she frantically told the dispatcher, "It smells like there's been a dead body in the car," referring to Casey's car, which had a foul odor inside it. Cindy's alarm and heartbreak were evident, and this series of calls marked the official beginning of the search for Caylee. When law enforcement arrived, they immediately questioned Casey, and her responses quickly sparked suspicion. She insisted that Caylee had been in the care of a nanny named Zenaida, whom she sometimes referred to as Zanny. Casey claimed that Zenaida had taken Caylee and was now refusing to bring her back. However, as investigators looked into Casey's story, they struggled to verify any of her claims. No evidence of Zenaida's existence or connection to Casey was found. Police even conducted interviews with people Casey mentioned as potential contacts, but none could confirm seeing or knowing Zenaida. As detectives pressed Casey further, inconsistencies in her story continued to emerge. She insisted she had been conducting her own investigation into Caylee's disappearance, even visiting clubs and stores where she thought Zenaida might be. But detectives found it difficult to reconcile this account with Casey's behavior over the past month. During that time, Casey was seen out at local bars, socializing with friends, and even attending parties. Photos from this period showed her smiling and dancing, a behavior that didn't align with the serious situation of her daughter's alleged disappearance. As investigators continued to question Casey, her story continued to unravel. Each new detail she provided led to more inconsistencies. Casey initially told law enforcement that she had worked at Universal Studios and that Zanny had frequently picked up Caylee from there while Casey was at work. Detectives arranged to visit Universal Studios with Casey, hoping to verify her employment and potentially gain further insight into her story. But when they arrived, Casey led them confidently through the entrance and along a series of hallways, only to eventually admit that she no longer worked there and hadn't been employed at Universal for some time. This moment became one of the clearest signs to investigators that Casey's claims couldn't be trusted. The inconsistencies continued to mount. Casey's account of the last days she saw Caylee varied, leaving investigators unable to establish a clear timeline. Her stories conflicted not only with the evidence but also with statements from her own friends and family. Detectives began to suspect that Casey's claims about Zanny were part of a fabricated story, possibly intended to mislead them. No trace of Zanny could be found, no friends or family could confirm her existence, and each lead Casey provided dissolved upon investigation. Further complicating matters, Casey's behavior during the month Caylee was missing raised significant red flags. During a period when her daughter was allegedly in the hands of a kidnapper, Casey was seen frequenting Orlando's social scene. She attended parties, visited bars, and socialized with friends, all while Caylee's whereabouts remained unknown. Photos surfaced of Casey at these gatherings, often smiling, dancing, and engaging in behavior that seemed inconsistent with a mother worried about her missing child. Her friends reported that she appeared relaxed and upbeat, never mentioning Caylee's disappearance or showing any outward signs of distress. This lifestyle continued throughout the month, leading investigators to further question her story. When friends later recounted their interactions with Casey, many expressed shock and confusion over her casual demeanor during Caylee's disappearance. Her behavior, combined with the lack of urgency in reporting Caylee missing, only deepened suspicions. Casey's apparent focus on social activities and her resistance to discussing Caylee's whereabouts pointed to a troubling disconnect between her words and actions. Casey's friends and acquaintances also shared details about her financial struggles and frequent clashes with her family, particularly with her mother, Cindy. Reports surfaced that Casey had often stolen from her friends and even her parents to support herself. This pattern of behavior created a portrait of a young woman whose actions often contradicted her claims. While she projected the image of a responsible, concerned mother, her conduct raised questions about her sincerity and motives. On December 11, 2008, 6 months after Caylee Anthony was last seen, her remains were discovered in a wooded area less than a half-mile from the Anthony family home. The discovery was made by a utility worker named Roy Kronk, who had initially called law enforcement in August to report seeing something unusual in the same area. At that time, police searched but failed to locate anything significant. However, on this December day, as he once again checked the area while out on a work assignment, Kronk spotted a small skull protruding from a garbage bag amidst a dense, swampy landscape. Investigators quickly arrived on the scene, and as they examined the area, they uncovered additional skeletal remains scattered around the site, likely due to animal activity. Inside the bag with the skull, they found remnants of a child-sized blanket decorated with images of Winnie the Pooh, as well as traces of Caylee's clothing, a small child's shorts, and a t-shirt that matched descriptions given by the family. These items, and their proximity to the Anthony home, left little doubt that the remains were Caylee's. One of the most disturbing aspects of the discovery was a strip of duct tape found attached to the front of the skull, stretching from the nose to the jaw area. Forensic analysts noted that this tape was significant. Its position suggested it may have been used intentionally to cover the nose and mouth, leading investigators to consider it a potential indication of foul play. The duct tape was examined carefully for any additional forensic clues, such as fingerprints, but none were identifiable due to weather exposure and the length of time Caylee had been missing. Once the remains were collected, they were sent to the medical examiner's office for a formal autopsy. Dr. Jan Garavaglia, the chief medical examiner for Orange County, oversaw the examination. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, determining the exact cause of death proved challenging. The skeletal remains showed no obvious signs of physical trauma, such as fractures or other injuries that might indicate an accident. However, Dr. Garavaglia noted the presence of duct tape on the skull as suspicious and significant. She concluded that while the cause of death could not be definitively determined due to the condition of the remains, the manner of death was likely a homicide based on the circumstances. The findings at the scene and from the autopsy raised more questions about Caylee's final moments. The presence of the duct tape, coupled with the fact that Caylee's body had been hidden and discarded in a secluded area, suggested to investigators that Caylee's death may not have been accidental. The location of the body, so close to the Anthony home, also pointed to someone familiar with the area. The bag, the blanket, and the tape became key pieces of evidence, hinting at possible intentional concealment. The trial of Casey Anthony, which began in May 2011, was one of the most closely followed and polarizing cases in modern American history. With accusations of murder on one side and claims of an accidental death on the other, the prosecution and defense each presented starkly different versions of what happened to 2-year-old Caylee Anthony. The trial became not just a legal proceeding, but a media spectacle that captured the nation's attention, leading to widespread debates about justice, parental responsibility, and the power of reasonable doubt. The prosecution's case rested on the argument that Casey Anthony intentionally killed her daughter. Prosecutors painted Casey as a young mother who had grown resentful of her responsibilities and longed for a life unburdened by parenting. In their opening statement, they argued that Casey saw Caylee as an obstacle to her freedom and social life. They presented evidence showing that during the month Caylee was missing, Casey continued to socialize, attending parties, spending time with her boyfriend, and frequently visiting nightclubs. They argued this behavior was inconsistent with that of a grieving or worried mother and suggested that Casey was, in fact, relieved to be free from the responsibilities of raising a child. The prosecution claimed that Casey's motive was clear. By eliminating Caylee, she could live as she pleased, unrestrained by the obligations of motherhood. To support this theory, they introduced evidence that Casey had searched for terms like chloroform and neck breaking on the family computer. Additionally, they brought forward testimony that high levels of chloroform were found in the trunk of Caylee's car, where investigators also noted the distinct odor of decomposition. The prosecution argued that Caylee had used chloroform to subdue Caylee, then placed duct tape over her nose and mouth to suffocate her. They contended that Caylee then hid Caylee's body in the trunk of her car before eventually disposing of her remains in the nearby woods. The defense, however, offered a very different explanation. In their opening statements, Caylee's defense attorneys argued that Caylee's death was a tragic accident, not a murder. Lead defense attorney Jose Baez claimed that Caylee had accidentally drowned in the Anthony family's pool on June 16, 2008. Baez argued that upon discovering Caylee's body, Caylee panicked, and rather than report the accident, she attempted to cover it up. According to the defense, Caylee's father, George Anthony, was present when the drowning occurred and advised Caylee to hide what had happened. Baez claimed that George, a former police officer, was concerned about potential consequences for the family and pressured Caylee into concealing the death. To bolster this theory, Baez suggested that Caylee's behavior, the partying, the stories she told about Caylee being with a nanny, and even her lack of immediate concern, was a result of her lifelong habit of suppressing emotions and fabricating stories to cope with trauma. The defense argued that Caylee's history of lying and evasion was rooted in a childhood filled with secrets, going so far as to suggest that Caylee had been abused by her father. While George Anthony denied these allegations, the defense argued that Caylee's upbringing left her with deeply ingrained emotional issues, influencing her actions following Caylee's death. Throughout the trial, both sides called a range of witnesses to support their cases. Forensic experts presented evidence on the alleged chloroform residue in Caylee's car trunk, as well as the presence of human decomposition odors. Dr. Arpad Vass, an expert in human decomposition, testified for the prosecution, stating that air samples from the trunk contained traces indicative of a decomposing body. The defense, however, countered this testimony by questioning the reliability of odor analysis and claiming that other chemicals could produce similar results. Additional witnesses included Caylee's family members. Cindy Anthony, Caylee's mother, provided pivotal testimony about her 911 call and the month Caylee was missing. Cindy also surprised the courtroom by testifying that she, not Caylee, had made the internet searches for chloroform, claiming they were part of a search for chlorophyll related to her pets. This contradicted earlier forensic testimony and raised questions about the reliability of certain evidence. The defense also called witnesses who testified about Caylee's demeanor and mental state. Friends described Caylee as behaving normally in the month Caylee was missing, though this backfired, as the prosecution used this as evidence of Caylee's detachment and lack of grief. George Anthony took the stand to deny any involvement in covering up Caylee's death or knowledge of the alleged drowning. Throughout the trial, forensic experts from both sides debated the significance of the duct tape found on Caylee's remains. The prosecution argued that its presence indicated premeditated murder, suggesting the duct tape was applied to suffocate Caylee. The defense, however, argued that the tape could have been placed there posthumously as part of a failed attempt to dispose of the body without necessarily proving intent to murder. The media played a significant role in shaping public opinion and amplifying the trial's emotional intensity. The case attracted national attention from the outset, and with every development, media outlets provided extensive coverage, dissecting each piece of evidence and each witness statement. News networks aired live broadcasts of the trial, while commentators and legal analysts speculated on the outcome. Public opinion largely turned against Caylee, with many Americans viewing her as guilty based on her behavior and the prosecution's portrayal of her motives. The trial lasted for 6 weeks, culminating in the highly anticipated verdict. On July 5, 2011, the jury found Caylee Anthony not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and aggravated manslaughter. She was, however, convicted of 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. The not guilty verdict shocked the public, leading to widespread debates about the effectiveness of the justice system and the burden of proof in criminal trials. On July 5, 2011, after 6 weeks of testimony and more than 400 pieces of evidence presented in the courtroom, the jury in the Caylee Anthony trial delivered its verdict. The jury found Casey Anthony not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and aggravated manslaughter of a child. These were the charges most directly linked to the accusation that Casey had intentionally caused the death of her daughter, Caylee. The jury did, however, convict her on 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. These charges stemmed from the series of misleading statements Casey made during the initial investigation, including her claims about Caylee being with a nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, who was later proven not to exist. The verdict came as a shock to many who had closely followed the case, and the public reaction was swift and intense. News networks and social media exploded with comments from viewers who had watched the trial unfold, and many expressed disbelief and outrage over the not guilty verdict on the murder charge. The case had gripped the nation for 3 years, with much of the public convinced that Casey was responsible for Caylee's death. Photos of Casey's social activities during the month her daughter was missing, combined with evidence of suspicious internet searches and conflicting accounts from Casey herself, had painted a picture that left many unconvinced of her innocence. The jury's decision went against what many believed was a clear narrative of guilt. If you found this case compelling and want more in-depth true crime coverage, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We've got more cases to uncover, so stay tuned.